Why didn't you ask me, what do you think of Shakespeare, and how do I have no idea about Shakespeare?
I know, that's fine.
I like the language, I like the whole ethos of Shakespeare.
My background of Shakespeare is zilch.
I read once in a book that Twelfth Night is often cited as an easy way into Shakespeare, sometimes the best play to introduce people who don't know a lot about Shakespeare to Shakespeare, because it's easily accessible and there's 3 good reasons for it.
I first saw Twelfth Night when I was 15 years of age, and I was supposed to be reading it for school, and I hadn't read it for school.
1, it's a comedy. Who doesn't like a good laugh?
It's hilarious.
I've always run away from Shakespeare. I don't understand it, I don't get it.
I did the typical studying a couple for GCSEs.
My first ever attempt at acting was Midsummer Night's Dream.
My experience with Shakespeare has been barely any.
I had a small part in that when I was the age of 10.
I did Romeo and Juliet and kind of found it quite boring.
And my mother paid for me to go on a trip to see Twelfth Night, and I went along only because I didn't want to go to school that day.
And then I was introduced to Twelfth Night.
And I went and saw it at 15, having not read it and not understanding Shakespeare, and saw a performance of it and absolutely loved it.
And was absolutely taken away with how wonderful the story was.
The thing is, when we first saw Twelfth Night, it made sense.
2, it's a love story. Who doesn't like a love story?
When you see the words just on a page with no emphasis and no real dictation, you don't really get a grasp of exactly what's being said.
But there's a real genuine love and feel for something when you see it visual without knowing the language.
But when you see people say it with energy and passion, you really understand it, even if you don't know Shakespeare.
And the physicality of the thing. It's a good show.
It's something that I studied in school and absolutely loved the play, so really excited to get the chance to perform it here.
And 3rd, it's got a lot of comedic elements. There's people mistaken for other people. There's all kinds of false accusations going on and people falling over things. It's you know, what's not to like?
It's Shakespeare Parent Trap.
I'm a really big fan of She's the Man, which is based on Twelfth Night, and I'm not allowed to talk about that.
It's 2 people who look alike and get in weird, wacky hijinks.
But if you've seen that, you'll definitely understand it.
Twelfth Night has always been something I've really wanted to be involved with.
Frankly, I've looked forward to it from the moment it was decided it was what we were going to do.
It's been really funny as well.
As it is his funniest comedy.
To the point where 25 years later, Twelfth Night is still the singular greatest story, play, movie, film, book, narrative of any sort that I have ever seen.
It's a very straightforward piece of plain speaking.
It's not as hard as people say to remember it, and it's not as hard as people say to understand it.
I understood it, I knew exactly what was going on.
It's not a difficult show to get, it's just performed differently than other shows, some might say.
It was Shakespeare's language, it was Shakespeare's speech, but there was music and there were songs, and it was put in such a way that it was wonderful to see. It's an amazing show, it's an amazing cast, and it's such an accessible piece of Shakespeare. It's just such a wonderful work.
And therefore, if you're sitting there going, I don't get Shakespeare. I was a 15-year-old kid who didn't care about Shakespeare, who actively disliked Shakespeare, and I fell in love with Twelfth Night.
I'm a really big fan of and I'm not allowed to talk about that.
Who did you tell you were going to be playing Shakespeare?
I told Sir Ian McKellen that I was going to be in Shakespeare in Twelfth Night, and I told him I had no history of Shakespeare and didn't know what it was about. So I'm sorry, Sir Ian. I will do the guy proud.